Today is a very special episode of Hollywood Kitchen because we are saluting an incredible woman and a trailblazer in the cinema, and that is the great Dorothy Dandridge. She was the very first African-American woman to ever be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. And both Krista Lawler and I are showing off our biographies by Donald Bogle. Donald Bogle is the most preeminent African-American film historian in the country. And just this week, Turner Classic Movies announced that he will be given the Robert Osborne Award at this year's Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. So I was super honored to get Donald for Hollywood Kitchen. Due to scheduling, Donald's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and due to our schedules, we had to film this interview a few months ago. So I'm going to introduce Krista, and Krista Lawler is my friend and frequent Hollywood Kitchen contributor, and she also loves Dorothy Dandridge. Hello, Krista. Thank you for.
I'm looking forward to the interview so much.
Me too. So what I'm going to do today is a little different in the format. So I'm going to share my screen here in a minute, and we're going to watch my 44-minute interview with Donald Bogle that was recorded. And it was recorded right around the time of Dorothy's centennial birthday, by the way. And then when that interview is over, Krista and I will be back, and we're going to talk all about the Dorothy Dandridge quick cinnamon roll recipe. And we'll discuss our trials and tribulations of making that, because much like Carmen Jones, it was a little more complicated than we realized. So, Krista, are you ready? Without further ado?
I am ready.
Okay, let's do this interview with Donald Bogle. Welcome to our Hollywood Kitchen, all about Dorothy Dandridge and celebrating her centennial. And I could think of no better person on the planet to interview for this occasion than the great Donald Bogle. Donald Bogle is Dorothy Dandridge's official biographer. He has written several books on African-American film history and a frequent contributor of Turner Classic Movies. So Donald, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Carrie, it's great to be with you. And I'm really just so happy you're doing this on Dorothy, celebrating, her centennial, born November 9th, 1922. So it will be 100 years. So I'm really happy about it. And I'm thrilled that she's included and that I'm included.
So if you had to tell somebody who knew nothing about film history about Dorothy Dandridge, what would you tell them?
Dorothy Dandridge was this remarkable actress who had this tremendous cultural impact in the 1950s. She was the first African-American to be nominated for an Oscar in a leading role category. Hattie McDaniel had won in 1939 for Gone with the Wind as supporting actress, and Ethel Waters had been nominated as supporting actress in 1949 for Pinky. And Dorothy was the first one to get a leading role nomination before Sidney Poitier, who isn't nominated until he does The Defiant Ones, a 1958 film. But Dorothy appeared in Carmen Jones, and she got the nomination. She got a lot of attention, magazine covers. The film was taken by its director, Otto Preminger, to the Cannes Film Festival. It was not an entry, but it was shown, and the international press just went crazy about her. So she had a life really of achievement. She'd been acting a long time before she did Carmen Jones. She started as a little girl in films. And after Carmen Jones, the industry just wasn't, in a sense, ready for her. And so it was a struggle to find roles. She does appear, one of her other films is a film also directed by Otto Preminger in 1959, Porgy and Bess, which is not seen much now. People don't.
I have never seen it.
Yeah, you can't. And it's so she did other films, and then she really had an unhappy, tragic life, and she ended up dying in 1965. And so when I was beginning to work on the book, I knew she was not as well remembered as she should be. And that was part of my mission in doing the book, to bring her back.
Well, I'm wondering, when you were researching this book, what were you most surprised to discover in that process?
Well, there were actually two things that that surprised me. I guess foremost, if you see Carmen Jones and you see this very extroverted character, and it, she and a sort of provocative character with this very open sensuality. I was surprised that she was not at all like Carmen Jones. She really wasn't. She was, her sister Vivian Dandridge described Dorothy as an introvert, and of course in a very public profession. And Dorothy, she didn't smoke because she was a singer. She didn't do that, and she was a very in terms of the way she dressed and everything, she was very sedate and very refined, just not at all like this Carmen Jones. That did surprise me about her. The other thing that surprised me when I'd signed a contract to do the book, and when I started, I planned to deal with her early life, not a lot, really passingly, and to focus mainly on what happened to her in the 50s, and mainly when she did Carmen Jones and what happened afterwards. But what surprised me as I started to interview people who knew her, who worked with her, was what had happened earlier in her life. I mean, there was so much before Carmen Jones. And I knew that as a little girl, her mother, Ruby Dandridge, also an actress, that Ruby had left her husband and taken her two daughters, Dorothy and Dorothy's older sister, Vivian, from Cleveland, eventually to Los Angeles to get them in the movies. And this was during the Great Depression. Now, for a Black woman, really for anyone, to just assume they're going to leave Cleveland and get their children in the movies. And during the Depression, it just seems preposterous. But Ruby Dandridge was a very ambitious woman, and ambitious for her children. And indeed, she did get them in movies. So that surprised me, the movie work that Dorothy had done way before Carmen Jones, that there was an extensive body of work. And she also did things in the early 40s. She had some unbilled appearances. So that was surprising to me. These things that had gone on before. So they were eye openers for me as I was researching and then writing the book.
Wow, I find that in classic Hollywood, there always seems to be such a giant disparity between who the person was on film and who the person was behind closed doors. It's kind of interesting.
Yes. The other thing about Dorothy behind closed doors, Dorothy had two marriages, and her first marriage was to Harold Nicholas of the Nicholas brothers, the great Nicholas brothers.
Love them.
If you see Stormy Weather, that staircase number at just about at the end of the film, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's one of the greatest musical sequences in movie history. So Dorothy's first marriage was to Harold Nicholas of the Nicholas brothers. There was Fayette, the older brother, Harold, the baby brother. And Harold was rather spoiled. He had grown up in show business. And he and Dorothy met at the Cotton Club when the Dandridge sisters, there were three Dandridge sisters, two biological sisters, and a third who was a friend. Etta Jones was her name. But there was Dorothy, Vivian, and Etta Jones, and they appeared at the Cotton Club in New York in the late 30s. And that's where Harold Nicholas met Dorothy. And they had a courtship, and they married in the early 40s in Los Angeles. It was a big wedding. And Black Hollywood, it was the talk of Black Hollywood. Hattie McDaniel attended the wedding, and for Dorothy, she had a romantic view of the world, and she just thought this was going to be a wonderful union. And she and Harold married. They had a daughter, and Dorothy just thought it was all going to be ideal, but it wasn't. And Harold Nicholas, by his own admission, he was a womanizer. He told me he felt he had been too young to get married. That may be true, but Dorothy believed in the marriage and believed in him, and she it just really unsettled her that he at different times he wasn't at home. They had a daughter who was named Harolyn, and Dorothy then assumed, well, maybe everything now is just going to come together. And the daughter, um, as time went on with the little girl, they called her Lynn. The name was Harolyn, but they called her Lynn. Dorothy saw that she wasn't developing. She wasn't able to talk. She didn't necessarily recognize Dorothy, and she just became really concerned as more time moved on. And she went from one doctor to another with her little girl, and was trying to find out what was wrong. And she really did it on her own. I mean, her sister and her closest friend, Jerry Branton, who was the first wife of Fayette Nicholas, they said that Dorothy carried the weight of this herself. And it wasn't until a little later, after World War II, in the really later 40s, that Dorothy went to a physician. And it was interesting. It was a female physician, and she told Dorothy, she said, she called her Mrs. Nicholas, and she said, Mrs. Nicholas, it's your daughter's never going to learn to talk, to read. She's not really going to know you. And as it turned out, the daughter had been born brain damaged, and this just shook Dorothy Dandridge. It shook really the whole family. But for Dorothy, there was guilt about it. And, this was an earlier era when people with children with great disabilities or any kind of disability, that earlier time when there was so much that wasn't known, there was guilt. And was she responsible? And there had been an incident when the daughter was born. Dorothy had awakened that morning and she had pain, and she told Harold, and he said, well, I don't think it's time, is it? And she felt, well, maybe not. So he was going out, and he took her over to be with her friend, Geraldine Brandon, who everyone called Jerry. At that time, she was Jerry Nicholas. And Dorothy was with her, and Harold left. And he left the car and told them if they had to go to the hospital, the car was there. And he went off with a friend, and he went to play golf, and he loved golf. And then Dorothy really went into labor, and it was terrible, and they had to get her to the hospital, and she wanted to wait for Harold. And they said, you've got to go. And the car was there, but he had forgotten to leave the car keys. And so they couldn't use the car. And finally there was a neighbor, and they got her to the hospital. And when Lynn was born, they had to use forceps in the delivery, and which was not necessarily greatly uncommon. I'll put it that way. Everyone said that, this had been done. But Dorothy, afterwards, when she learned about her daughter's condition, she just felt this guilt and blamed herself. And that was one of the things that followed her throughout her life.
Yeah, I was wondering, did she ever know Gene Tierney, who had a very similar situation?
Yes, well, they worked together in a movie.
That's true.
They worked in the movie Sundown, and Gene Tierney was a star. It was the early 40s. I think it was 41. And Dorothy had, she had a role in it. It wasn't a big role, anything like that. I do not know of them having sort of met and talked. So that I'm not sure, but they both had these children with these great disabilities, and it, I think it tormented Gene Tierney as well. So she and Dorothy had these similarities. But as far as being friends and discussing it, I've never come across anything like that. I did wonder, but no, I haven't come across anything.
I can't even imagine, because back then that's just the lack of support, the lack of help for someone in a situation like that.
Yeah. And the thing about Dorothy and her daughter, once she learned her daughter's condition, the marriage had not been going well. And the Nicholas brothers, after World War II, they went to Europe, where they performed and were big stars. Dorothy went with Harold, and Jerry Fayard's wife went. And so they traveled together. They had a great time, but both men were womanizers, and their wives had to deal with it. But nonetheless, for Dorothy, the marriage was falling apart. And then when she learned her daughter's condition, then she just knew that she didn't want to continue with the marriage, and she had to do something on her own. Now, during this time, Dorothy was always working. And as I said, she did some unbilled films and so forth, but she always worked. But when the marriage ended, then she just channeled all of her energies and her frustrations into her career. That she then became determined. She felt she had to define herself in some way that she didn't have to feel guilty about. And that's when she just threw all of her energies into the career. And she always wanted to be a dramatic actress in film. From the time she was a little girl, this was her ambition. And there were just no parts in the early 50s. And what happened, she worked with an arranger composer by the name of Phil Moore. And Phil Moore was one of these, he was an African-American man who had been at MGM, one of the first Black men to work at MGM in the music department. And Phil Moore was a great vocal coach, and he had worked with Lena Horne and had been important to Lena Horne's career. And he had known Dorothy from the time she was a little girl. And then he started to work with her, and she was able to create a very successful nightclub act. But she still wanted to be an actress. And in the early 50s, if you see her, there's a movie called Tarzan's Peril. And Lex Barker's Tarzan, and Dorothy is an African princess who becomes an African queen and so forth. And you see Lex Barker and Dandridge in certain scenes. You know that his mind seems to be more on her than Jane. You know, he's just, you know, he the actor. And Dandridge, and the way it's edited, there are those moments where you wonder. And Variety commented when it reviewed the film that in this one, she got more attention, Dorothy, than Jane did. So she got attention for that. And then Ebony magazine put her on the cover, wearing her outfit from Tarzan's Peril. And Ebony said that she would, it felt she was going to be a Black movie goddess, queen. And so she got attention there. And then she did Bright Road. And Bright Road was a film from 1953. And Gerald Mayer directed it. And she played a school teacher trying to reach a wayward student in elementary school. And her co-star was a young actor, singer from New York, Harry Belafonte. And they had a friendship. I'll tell you something that I was told. I don't know if this is true, but it's a fabulous story. Before they met, before they did Bright Road and everything, and everybody I hope knows what Harry Belafonte looked like. Very, very handsome. Anyway, Dorothy Dandridge had come to New York, and she had gone to a club or something, and she was meeting people, and someone said to her, you know, you're so beautiful. I only know one person who's as beautiful as you are. And Dorothy was reported to have said, well, who? And the person said, well, his name is Harry Belafonte. And apparently the same thing happened with Belafonte. Someone, I don't know, one person is beautiful, and of course they were a beautiful couple in Bright Road, and later in Carmen Jones. But she appeared in Bright Road, and then there was she continued her nightclub career, and then Otto Preminger was casting for his production of Carmen Jones, and he was interviewing all these different actresses, and he had not seen Dorothy, and he hadn't requested a meeting with her. And her manager was just, he couldn't understand it. Dorothy couldn't understand it. And they finally landed an appointment for her to see Preminger. Now, this all sounds like a press agent's dream, what happened, but apparently it's true. That the morning she left to go to her audition, her sister Vivian was staying with her. And Vivian told me, well, you know, Dorothy, that day she went, the way she was dressed, she was so sort of prim. And because Dorothy had always had this thing about ladylike behavior. And so Vivian just felt she should have dressed differently. But Dorothy went, she saw Preminger, and Preminger was aware of who she was and everything. And he said, well, you know, whenever I see you, I think of Saks Fifth Avenue. I don't think of you as my earthy Carmen. And he wanted to cast her as Cindy Lou in the film. Cindy Lou is the good girl in the movie, played very, very well by Olga James, quite well. And so he said, take the script, look at Cindy Lou's, you know, look at the Cindy Lou character, and then come back next week, and, you know, and you can read from me. Dorothy thanked him. She left, but she was infuriated. She said he wasn't even considering her for Carmen, and she talked to her sister Vivian and her mother Ruby and so forth, and they were outraged too, the three Dandridge women. And Vivian said to her, well, you know, the way you went in, you've got to go back and show him that you have this other side, or you can project another side. And they went to Max Factor and worked on a new kind of makeup for her, and they did her hair differently. And she went in the next time, and she sort of wore low cut blouse or whatever, and she took a rose with her, and she when the door opened to Preminger's office, there she was with the rose and so forth. And he looked at her and he said, it's Carmen. And he arranged a screen test. He said it was just about the best he had ever seen, and she got the role. So, and that was, you know, another phase in her life. So
I was so lucky. The first time I ever saw Carmen Jones, I saw it on 35 millimeter at the UCLA Film and TV Archive here in Los Angeles, which was the best possible way to see that film and her for the very first time long ago, was in that way. She's just explosive in that movie, and seeing it on a big screen like that is just incredible.
It really is to see her on the big screen. It's just it's amazing. She's so charismatic. She's so dynamic. And the thing about Carmen Jones, that the part that bothered her, once she knew she had the role, she didn't want Carmen to come across simply as sort of a whore, you know, a black whore. She was just, you know, a black woman to be depicted in this way. And so she really worked at depicting a Carmen who wanted to be free and to be liberated. And in the movie, you see her, she's in a world that these men really control, whether it's Belafonte, who's her lover, or it's Husky Miller, this boxer that she takes up with. And she is resistant to that. And that was very important to her, to show a woman operating essentially in a man's world, but working to, you know, to operate on her terms and not to be controlled. And of course, we know at the end of the film, she's sort of punished for her independence, this character, Carmen. And she ends up, you know, being strangled. And so, but it's a great performance. And you're right, to see her on the big screen.
It's a knockout.
Yes. Yes.
I don't think I blinked once. I was just sitting there like this for the whole running time of the film.
Yeah. Yeah. And Preminger understood her, how to film her and so forth. because at the beginning of the film, there's that early in the film, it's not the very beginning, but there's the cafeteria sequence where the workers are dining, and she comes in alone, and of course you can't take your eyes off her, and so he's really given her an entrance, so that we say, wow, this is Carmen Jones, and she exchanges this dialogue with others in the room, and she just controls it. She controls the scene, and throughout the movie, she is the dominant force.
And it just seems so gut-wrenching to me that there should have been so many more movies like that with her in the lead role. There should have been so many more nominations. I mean, as we talked about, she had the goods. She's stunningly gorgeous, sexy. She could sing, she could dance, she could act. She's got everything,
Yeah.
except she's in the wrong time period where they weren't.
Well, the thing was, that after Carmen Jones, it was to be 3 years before she got to do another film.
And that's just horrifying to me.
Yeah, that was Island in the Sun.
Was it because Preminger had just not wanted her to take supporting parts? He only wanted her to take leads. Was that?
That did carry, yeah. That she was supposed to do the King and I, the role that Rita Moreno eventually played, Tumpton. And of course, Deborah Carr is the star of the film, and with Yul Brynner and so forth. And she had signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, and she was to do that role, and which she had agreed to initially, but Preminger felt that she shouldn't take it. And she had feelings ultimately that she shouldn't before she told Fox. But Preminger felt that after she had that nomination as Best Actress and so forth, to take a supporting role, that she would be boxed in afterwards, that she wouldn't get to do starring roles. Now, we don't know. We don't. But the thing about Otto Preminger, which I can understand about him, I had interviewed him, and he and Dandridge had an affair, and he never said that to me. He never, admitted to that, and I was too young to really ask him, but people I talked to, it had happened. But the thing about Preminger, he believed so much in her talent with Carmen Jones. He was a very sophisticated man, really worldly. The thing Otto Preminger really didn't see was what was going to happen to her in the film industry because of race and racial attitudes. That he just didn't see. He directed 2 Black cast films. He had done Carmen Jones, and later he did Porgy and Bess, and he didn't see that aspect. But Dorothy backed out of The King and I, and she later said that she felt that was the mistake of her career, because she had agreed to do it, then she backed out, and then they were really just through with her. They were just so annoyed by it. And she then, she had to, she struggled for parts. And it's interesting, Darryl F. Zanuck, who produced Island in the Sun and who had been the head of production at 20th Century Fox, Zanuck liked her. He did. And so he brought her in for Island in the Sun, which dealt with interracial romance. Dorothy was opposite a white actor, John Justin, and Harry Belafonte was in it, opposite Joan Fontaine. And the thing was, it was a very, they were trying to be, to move forward with this thing of, interracial romance, that Hollywood hadn't dealt with it with real interracial couples on screen. And it became a very compromised movie. And they didn't, you see Belafonte with Joan Fontaine, I mean, you don't even know it's supposed to be a romance, it's just, they weren't going to film but so much, to even suggest certain things. But with Dandridge, they went further, that she and the actor John Justin, they do have a scene where they dance together, and it's a romance and this and that, but they did not want them to kiss. And you had the production code hanging over the film, and the production code had said there couldn't be miscegenation, mixing of the races on screen and so forth, even though the production code was changing. And Dorothy approached the director of the film, Robert Ross, and she talked to Zanuck, and John Justin did too, and they felt that they should kiss, they had to go further, and ultimately they wouldn't let them kiss. And it's you see it today. There's a scene I showed to my students where the two are together, and it's a romance, and they're talking, and then just when we should have this big romantic kiss, they sort of rub cheeks, and it's laughable, but that became a problem for her, who they were going to cast opposite.
In reading your book, it just broke my heart, because not only is she fighting for roles, fighting against horrible racial discrimination, and then the two disappointing marriages, and then the bankruptcy, and then, of course, her daughter. It's like, no wonder she was depressed. I just feel like reading it, you just think, my God, this poor woman, like, how much more can a person take? Yeah. It's just truly.
And, when she went bankrupt, the second marriage was just a disaster. But when she went bankrupt, then, she had provided support for her daughter and had care for her daughter all those years. She couldn't continue, and her daughter was made a ward of the state, and that broke her in two. But I'll tell you something, that it's interesting that when I was working on the book, I visited all the places, the primary places where she had lived, and I saw the place where she died. And I got into the apartment. My researcher had arranged it, and she had died on the floor of her bathroom. That's where they found her body. And it was, the coroner ultimately said it was an overdose of a pill prescribed for her by her doctor. And she, so nonetheless, she had died there. And the building itself, remember, she's on the skids now. She's going bankrupt. It is really a beautiful, romantic building. Architecturally, it's quite interesting, and the trees and the foliage in front of the building and so forth. And in a strange way, the romanticism of the building, with her tragic end, she was in a beautiful setting. I wouldn't have wanted to see her, collapsing on a street or something like that. I mean, it was strange, but it was, when I went into the bathroom where she had died, I mean, I could feel something. I just could, and it was just some experience. It really was. It was very moving.
Did she ever stay in touch with her first husband, by the way?
Yes, they did. They did. Harold Nicholas, when I interviewed him, he was living here in New York. He since has passed. But yes, that was another, asking about things that surprised me. That surprised me, that she had remained on friendly terms with him and his brother Fayard. And the Nicholas brothers had a sister named Dorothy, and she was friendly with Dorothy. Dorothy lived in Los Angeles. Yes, she was friendly with them, which was very nice. And they, Fayard, the older brother, just adored her, and Dorothy, the sister, adored her. And Harold still had this feeling, but shortly before her death, the Nicholas brothers had come. They were in the States, and they were performing in Las Vegas. And they invited her up to see the performance. And Harold Nicholas told me, I didn't ask him this, he volunteered it. He said, there's just the one thing I regret. I don't want to tell everything because I got to read the book for those who haven't. But something happened in Vegas that he regretted. She died a few months later, and he was at the funeral, and he was quite broken up. Also at the funeral was Peter Lawford. And Peter Lawford and Dorothy had a romance, and Peter Lawford had kept in contact with her. After their romance ended, he married one of the Kennedy sisters, and Peter Lawford, he was at the funeral and he was to read the obituary, and he was so broken up he couldn't do it. He felt intensely for her, and I felt that this was another relationship. Her good friend Jerry Branton didn't feel it was such a big relationship for Dorothy, but I had the feeling, from what I was finding, that it had been for. I mean, it meant something, and they did keep in contact. And as you know, Peter Lawford kept in contact with Marilyn Monroe, and Dorothy and Monroe were friends, had been friends earlier. They both studied at the Actors Lab in Los Angeles, and Marilyn had stopped by Dorothy's apartment because Marilyn and also Ava Gardner, they studied with Phil Moore, who was this arranger composer who Dorothy became involved with Phil Moore, but Phil Moore also created her nightclub act. But Marilyn came over to be coached, and Ava came over to be coached.
I wish so badly there was a way the three of them could have made a film together. Can you imagine?
Yes.
The screen would just catch on fire. It would be so exciting.
Yes. Yeah. It's nice that, because someone told me that Marilyn, and because this is early in Marilyn's career, but in Dorothy's apartment, Dorothy had a little rug or something, and I guess it was a fireplace. And this friend, she said to me that, well, Dorothy and Marilyn, many a time, were sitting on that rug talking about romance and so with the men in their lives and so forth. It's kind of a sweet image. And they talked about other things, the business and everything. But she was friendly with Marilyn. Yeah. And Ava, I have a picture in the book of her with Ava. And so that Ava, and Ava was racially, Ava was also friendly with Lena Horne, that they were terrific friends. And it was something else that I would, in working on the book, that was interesting to find these the figures who did racially, who did mix. Not that all of Hollywood did racially, they didn't, but there were certain figures who did, and Ava Gardner was definitely one.
So. And Ava's 100th birthday is in December.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
There must have been something in the water in 1922, because tons of amazing people were born that year.
Well, you also reminded me, I had forgotten, Ruby Dee was born in 1920.
I want to do an episode on her in the new year sometime. So if you're game, I would love to do a Ruby Dee episode too.
Yeah, I knew Ruby. Yeah. So let me know.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I do love the story in your book about the chitlins. So do you want to relay about Dorothy's cooking and the chitlins?
Yeah. Well, Dorothy, a number of people told me she loved to cook. She loved to cook. And when she was married to Harold Nicholas in particular, she loved just preparing meals and so forth for him. And there was one evening where Count Basie's whole band sort of came over to their home, and she prepared a meal, all this other stuff. But Dorothy loved soul food, and she watched her diet, and she was careful during the week, but one day a week she would just have whatever she wanted. And so with soul food, she loved chitlins, and she would prepare them. And there was the evening that Peter Lawford came over, and it was Rocky Cooper, Gary Cooper's wife, who was friendly with Dorothy, and she was friendly with Peter. They came over, and Peter had been at the place one time before when Dorothy was fixing chitlins. I believe this happened, and the odor was just not pleasant. And he's, oh God, what is that? So Dorothy, this night, she had prepared them in advance and so forth. and she put them in these very elegant sort of stemmed glasses, I guess, with little cocktail forks or whatever, and had them try them without them knowing what it was, and they loved them. So, but yes, she would fix chitlins and other soul foods. So that was, she did all types of cooking, but she did love soul food. So.
And I'd love to talk about the impact that she has today. How you felt about the Halle Berry movie, and how Dorothy, there's like a through line of Dorothy from the 1950s all the way up through modern day contemporary African American talent in Hollywood.
Well, the Halle Berry movie, I thought it was, Halle Berry won the Golden Globe and the Emmy for playing Dandridge, and it was very important to her. I thought it was a heartfelt performance. I don't know, and this is not criticism of Halle Berry. There were things that the film didn't show. I'm waiting to see a remake. That there were just aspects in it that of her life that were not in the film, and so I would like to have seen other things, but the movie, it was an HBO movie, and it had its impact. I think Dorothy, it's interesting about Dorothy. It was actually in the late 90s that by then there was a new group, a new generation of Black actresses, and people like, Janet Jackson, Vanessa Williams, Whitney Houston, Lela Rochon. They all wanted to play Dorothy because Dorothy represented, and I think she still does. I mean, she's the one larger than life, tragic Black movie actress that we have, and people in the late 90s, those women saw that the problems she was confronted with professionally, and maybe some personal ones, that these problems have not gone away. The industry had not opened up, and even today we have more people working. We have Viola Davis, who's now an Oscar winner, which is great. We have Regina King, who's an Oscar winner. So we have that. And then we have the actresses like Zendaya, who's a good actress, and we have Halle Bailey, and we have Zoe Kravitz, women who could play Dorothy in a new version. But she really cleared the way. She was a pioneer who just, even though the industry didn't open up enough for her, that she was able to smash down barriers and open the way for generations afterwards. So her effects are still being felt, and she's still a woman that that actresses, particularly Black actresses, look up to with great respect and with great sensitivity. So she lives on. She still casts her spell over people today. She really does.
And Turner Classic Movies will be doing a centennial salute, I believe, on November 8th, showing several Dorothy Dandridge films.
Yes. I thought it's not going to be on the 9th. I thought.
Oh, maybe it's the 9th. I'll have to double check my TCM app.
Yeah, but they are doing, yes.
They are doing it. And then also the Academy is doing a dual centennial tribute to both Dorothy Dandridge and Ruby Dee.
Yeah.
A lot of exciting stuff going on.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really great. I'm just sorry she didn't get to see it, because at the end, how she felt, I don't know if she really felt the kind of triumph she did have, because Carmen Jones was a triumph, and her whole career, I mean, to get to that point, even after, so she didn't get roles, she still was this magnificent figure that people were fascinated by. So I'm happy for what's happening now. I don't know if she got it, but she's looking down at us and rejoicing.
And your book is really, it's outstanding. I was so honored to get an autographed copy from you of it at the Turner Classic
Yes,
Film
yes,
Festival.
yes. It was, and I'm glad that we have come in contact again. I was just, thrilled when you contacted me. And I said, I can't lose track of this, the timing, and well, this, the timing and so forth, because I want to do it, and I like the other things you've done. So I'm really, really very pleased.
And thank you, Donald, for everything that you do. I have several of your books, and they are so incredibly informative and important, I think, for anybody that loves film to know about this incredible history.
Well, thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much. And I love what you're doing.
Thank
So
you.
keep cooking with the stars and bringing to light their careers and their lives, because that's important.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everybody watching. And please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen. I hope you guys enjoyed that interview, and I'm just so grateful to Donald again for giving me his time. That was a huge honor.
His enthusiasm for Dorothy just radiates from his soul. Like when he talks, you can feel it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I didn't really talk that much. I just kind of sat there like this most of the time. Now, about the recipe. Now, previously on our Oscar cook-along, Krista, you made the Dorothy Dandridge emotional omelet. So tell us quickly about that recipe.
Okay, so the emotional omelet I thought was going to be a bust. And I don't even know how many times somebody came up to me afterwards and asked me what an emotional omelet is.
That's what it's in the book.
You know what my husband says, because he loves it so much, because I cook it at least once a week now. He says, it's so good, it makes you want to cry.
All right.
So
endorsement right there.
Yeah. So yeah, it turned out really well. I didn't have problems with it. The only one Dorothy recipe that I noticed you and I both had a little bit issues with was this one. So
now, let me tell you how I found out about this one. I wanted to do something different since the emotional omelet has kind of been covered a little on Hollywood Kitchen. And I found out there was a series of 3 coffee bread, as they called them, recipes in an article about Dorothy Dandridge in a 1950s copy of Ebony magazine. I wrote to Ebony about getting a back issue. I never heard back from them. I went to eBay, tried to find the back issue, couldn't find it. But that's when it comes in handy to know Christina Rice. She is the head of the photo archive at the LA Public Library. She's a friend, and she's frequently been on Hollywood Kitchen. So 2 minutes later, Christina Rice found the entire article in Ebony and sent it to me because she is amazing. And this article is all about Dorothy Dandridge, sort of her home life and being in the kitchen and loving to entertain and cook. And there are 3 recipes, they call them coffee bread, in the article. And I thought instead of trying to make 3 different things in one episode, we would just stick to one. So I picked the cinnamon rolls. It called them quick cinnamon buns, but then I kind of didn't want to post that because Dorothy Dandridge's quick cinnamon bun, it kind of, I don't want people on the internet to say rude things because no one says rude things about Dorothy Dandridge. I'm not going to put up with that. So I'm calling them quick cinnamon rolls, I guess. That sounds a little better. And I hacked the recipe because I live alone and I don't want to make enough for an army. So the original recipe called for, and this is my halved version, 2 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 cup of shortening, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a 1/2 teaspoon of sugar, a 1/2 cup of milk, and 1 egg. Now, the idea is you mix all the ingredients together, you roll them out with the rolling pin, and then you sprinkle 1 cup or a 1/2 cup of brown sugar and raisins. And then you roll it all up, you cut it into 1/2-inch slices, and then you bake it for about 375 for 25 minutes. Now, I did as Dorothy says, and this was my original test bake right here, which I will show. Oh, I just dropped food all over my laptop. Crap. Anyway, all right, this is what it looked like. And it's not bad, but I think my mistake was that I left it in the oven a tiny bit too long. It's a little bit crispy, and it didn't rise. And when you make cinnamon rolls, you kind of think about them being real fluffy, right? So this is actually very good, but it doesn't have the fluffiness to it. So I decided to do another test bake. And this time I consulted a lot of other recipes. And you know what I learned, Krista? And I think you probably learned this too. There are so many ways to make these.
There are. Yes.
And the more recipes I read, the more confused I got, the further down the rabbit hole I went. Some people say use butter. Some people say use shortening. Some people say, oh, you've got to let the yeast rise for 90 minutes. Other people say, oh, 20 minutes is fine. So I was kind of having a total like crisis of how I make the perfect cinnamon roll. But tell me about your experience with this.
Okay, so I was having something very similar to yours. The very first one that reminded me of like store-bought rolls. And what I was thinking about, just like you, was like a cinnamon bun type roll. You know what I mean? When cinnamon was around. So what I found out, because my mother-in-law, this is a very Midwest recipe. Like you can tell she's from Cleveland. So what I did is she's like, put a packet of yeast in it. I'm like, a packet? And she's like, yeah, just put it in a packet. And instead of on a pan, put it in like a casserole dish and then cut it up into squares. So then it was kind of more like a cinnamon bread, but it wasn't. But it turned out right. But I had to do a lot of adaptions, a lot. Like even.
I'm sorry.
Go on. I'm sorry.
I read multiple cinnamon bun recipes. I even wound up printing a bunch of them out because I hate spilling stuff on my computer. Anyway, and what I wound up doing is I added a whole packet of yeast and then I rolled it up and I let the ball kind of sit for a while. And then I rolled it out and then I put the brown sugar and I went ahead with the raisins, although I wouldn't recommend doing that because the raisins really don't add any flavor. And they're just kind of these little lumps of, I don't know, in there. So I'm going to do without the raisins myself. Anyways, and then I rolled it all up. I sliced it in the 1/2-inch slices. I put it in a fairly small pan so they'd all kind of, be crowded in together. But then one recipe said, let it sit 20 minutes. Another said 90 minutes. And so what I did is I preheated my stove to 200. Then I turned it off. And then I put the pan with the rolls in there in the warm, but not currently working oven and let them rise. And instead of 20 minutes to 90 minutes, I kind of split the difference and went with about an hour. And that was enough time in a warmish oven for them to kind of rise up suitably. And then I put them back in the oven. I turned it on to 375 for about 25 minutes. I would recommend a little under that so the bottoms aren't quite so crispy. And then when it came to the frosting, Dorothy's recipe really didn't have frosting instructions. So what I did is I followed the first recipe, which is like powdered sugar, vanilla extract, and a little bit of milk. And I could not get the lumps out of the powdered sugar, no matter how hard I tried. And I kept doing this till like my arm was sore. It was still lumpy. So, and it was kind of runny too. It just wasn't working.
Yeah. Mine was that way too. And I had used those standalone mixers, and it still was, yeah.
The second, plan B, my second test bake, I decided to go full out on the whole cream cheese thing. So I got some cream cheese, the vanilla extract, powdered sugar, and milk. And it turned out really, really well. I am pretty darn proud of how my second test bake turned out. The rolls rose up and had some nice fluffiness to them. And I'm not going to hold this right over my laptop because I don't want cream cheese on it. But in any case, I think this looks really good. And I'm pretty proud of how it turned out.
It is immensely good. Yeah. It's so weird how like we talked some of what we were doing, but then we end up kind of doing the same thing anyways. It's like, I don't know, it's crazy. So.
Yeah. It's funny. A lot of these recipes that from the past, what I do is I'll try to make them the first time exactly as the vintage recipe says. And sometimes that works great. Sometimes that gets me into a lot of trouble. You never know which way the wind is always gonna blow. But then usually after the first test bake, I'll kind of sit down and go, okay, what went wrong? How can I fix it? And then that's when I try to figure it out. Yours looks great too.
Yeah, I noticed though, even though after I cooked it, like if it sat for a little bit, and I to save them for later, I would microwave them for like 20 to 30 seconds. And it kind of spread the frosting a little bit in between the crevices, which is great. So.
And you put yours in the refrigerator overnight, right, Krista, with the dough?
Yes, I did. Actually, my mother told me to do that.
Right.
Yes, I
My mom told me to add the yeast.
all moms help. So.
And my mom told me to add the yeast. So I think we were both calling our moms for this one.
Yes, we were.
So should we do a cinnamon roll toast to Dorothy?
Yes, let's do a cinnamon roll toast to Dorothy. I gotta get, there we go. I got it. I didn't bring a knife with me. There you go. And there's
Dorothy. So good.
Just like Dorothy.
Excellent. At TCM, I really, really wish I could just make a ton of these and hand them out to people at the screening if they weren't so messy, because I'm sure the theater would not like me getting cream cheese and cinnamon all over the theater. But this is a really good recipe.
You guys are so lucky to be going. So you're blessed.
I'm grateful, believe me. And they do show Dorothy Dandridge movies pretty frequently on TCM. And I definitely encourage everybody to watch them. And I love Bright Road too, because I feel like if you see Bright Road and Carmen almost as like a double feature, you really get a scope of her talent because she's so radically different in Bright Road.
She totally is. And I forget the child actor's name, but I have to find more information on him just because every time I watch it, I'm just like, this kid is so good. Yeah. So I'm gonna have to research what his name was.
Let me know when you do, because I agree with you. That child is really good. And stealing a scene from Dorothy Dandridge and Harry Belafonte, that's not easy to do. So
right.
He
totally was. So
yes. And one thing you and I were talking about before we went live was we both love fashion, of course, and Hollywood costuming. And one thing that always strikes me about Carmen Jones was the colors that she wears, because in the famous cafeteria scene, she has the red rose in her hair, the red skirt, and the lower cut black blouse. But throughout the movie, she wears pastels, she wears pink, and at the very end, she wears white. Now, the conventional choice in costuming, of course, would have been to put her in like scarlet red. Like that would have been my first instinct. So to have character as sexual and as liberated as she is in this film, to wear white, like I normally think of that as the color of innocence or purity or piety or something like that. So it kind of seems counterintuitive, but on the other hand, it kind of seems right. So what did you notice about that?
Well, what I think is that it was based off her character in that film. I think the seduction, when you think of seduction, you think of red. You think of fire, and that's what she was. She was playing with fire. But then like the further she got into the relationship with Harry, you got the pink and the little bit of love in there, a little bit of, and then toward the tail end when she's in all white, she dies. And it's like almost the color of etherealness, kind of. I feel like in that movie, like each of her costume choices had to pertain to what that character was going through at that time.
That's a really good point. And also it makes me think of Lana Turner, because several years earlier in 1946, when she did Postman Always Rings Twice, her character is so sexy in that movie. And there was a lot of concern about the sexuality of that film. And so in order to maybe tone it down, Lana Turner wears white throughout a lot of that movie too. So in a way, white kind of does work in those situations as well.
Another person that I think of with a character like that, and they use symbolism through their clothes, is Jane Greer in Out of the Past.
Oh, good point.
Have you ever watched that? And I mean, you don't, it's in color, or not in color, but you get the idea of what she's wearing. And you realize when she's turning a little bit bad when she goes from all these whites to all these blacks. So the wonderful world of costuming.
I think it's such an interesting area of study, though, too, because I think for people like us that love this stuff so much, it kind of enhances your enjoyment of the film when you think about the artistry and the decisions that went into what the stars wore on screen.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I know that Otto liked her wearing, like at premieres, cream and white. So she wore a lot of cream and white at premieres and stuff. So that was also the book.
I honestly think Dorothy's one of those women like Marilyn. She could have worn a burlap bag and been stunning, like no matter what she wears.
And can you, like, the trifecta of Ava Gardner, Marilyn Monroe, and her together?
I know my brain kind of went down a road of fantasizing about what that would be like, and I can't even fathom.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish so badly I could have a time machine to make that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see if we have any comments, Krista. Can you pull up comments?
Yeah.
Because my phone never does it.
I wanted to say that Danny Miller said it was Philip Hepburn was his name. Now I'm totally gonna go down that rabbit hole.
Rabbit holes are good things. Only 9 comments that are
okay. Let's see. Ooh.
All right. Well, when I do post this final blog post, by the way, I will put the Dorothy Dandridge recipe, but then I'll also put a whole lot of notes, and I'll put links and all the stuff that I did to sort of make this work. And I'll also post Krista's final photo of the final product and mine as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be great.
Do we have any other comments or questions on there, Krista? Or
not right now. No, I'm not seeing any questions. Some of them were asked during the time that Donald was on, but I addressed it before it went far up.
If you guys haven't read it, seriously, Donald's book is truly phenomenal, and I highly recommend it.
He does her justice. A huge job.
And really anything Donald's written is like a must. So
Hollywood Black. Yeah.
Bright Boulevards.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of Hollywood Kitchen. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. And again, I will have the final pre-recorded interview all edited together with Krista and I'll have that out later this week. And don't forget, I do have a Patreon link. So if anybody wants to donate to the Patreon, all of that helps cover ingredients, which seem to be getting more expensive by the week. And also, thank you guys for watching, for commenting, and I'm just so grateful for the support. So keep tuning in for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen.